The roar of engines filled the sky as a squadron of American torpedo bombers cut through the clouds, their silhouettes resembling giant seabirds gliding in formation. Below, the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. These brave pilots were on a deadly mission, one that could change the course of war. The radio crackled in the cockpit, a burst of static followed by a calm but firm voice issuing final commands. The pilots, each strapped into their seats, acknowledged with curt responses, their eyes fixed on the open sky ahead. The weight of the mission pressed heavily on their shoulders, but there was no time for doubt. The enemy fleet was out there, somewhere beyond the horizon, and their orders were clear: strike hard, strike fast, and return if fate allowed. The squadron moved as one, engines droning in harmony as the formation remained tight. These pilots had trained for this moment, knowing full well the dangers that awaited them. They had watched others go before them, some never to return, but the war demanded their resolve. They flew on, the ocean stretching endlessly below, its surface calm and deceptive, hiding the enemy's steel behemoths beneath the glow of the late afternoon sun. Inside the cockpits, sweat trickled down foreheads despite the cool altitude. Hands gripped controls with practiced precision, nerves held steady by discipline. They had been through drills, simulated attacks, and countless hours of preparation, but this was real. Each man understood that within minutes, the sky would explode with fire and metal. The lead pilot, a seasoned lieutenant with eyes sharpened by experience, scanned the distance ahead. The signal would come soon. His fingers tightened slightly on the stick, a silent gesture of readiness. In the distance, a dark smudge disrupted the horizon. The enemy was there. The formation adjusted slightly, angling toward the target. No words were needed. Every man knew what was coming. This was the moment that separated the warriors from the fallen. They descended gradually, their approach calculated. The lower they flew, the better the chances of delivering a precise strike, but it also made them vulnerable. Anti-aircraft guns were primed, waiting to unleash devastation the moment they came into range. The enemy was expecting them. This was not a surprise attack. It would be a contest of skill, determination, and survival. As they neared their objective, the formation tightened further. Each bomber trailed the one ahead, moving with the grace of seabirds gliding over the waves. Their approach was relentless, unwavering. The pilots had no time to dwell on fear, only instinct and training guiding them forward. The first flashes of fire erupted from the enemy warships, streaks of bright orange and black tearing through the sky. The stillness of the approach was shattered by the deafening roar of exploding shells. Smoke billowed into the air, filling the sky with chaos. The lead pilot banked slightly, dodging the first barrage. His wingmen followed suit, weaving through the incoming fire. The ocean below was disturbed by the impact of missed shots, water erupting in violent columns as rounds struck the surface. The squadron pressed on, cutting through the madness, closing the distance between themselves and their targets. Adrenaline coursed through their veins, but their focus remained sharp. Inside the cockpits, hands worked rapidly, adjusting controls, keeping the aircraft steady despite the turbulence of battle. The smell of oil, sweat, and metal filled the confined space. The enemy fleet was now fully visible, massive warships lined in formation, their guns belching fire into the sky. The time had come. One by one, the torpedo bombers broke formation, peeling off into their attack runs. Speed increased as they lined up their drops, skimming dangerously low over the waves. Every second mattered. The enemy gunners focused their fire, desperate to prevent the inevitable. The lead pilot's torpedo released cleanly, slicing into the water and disappearing beneath the surface. He didn't have time to watch its course. He yanked the stick, pulling the bomber into a sharp climb, engines straining as he banked away from the firestorm below. Behind him, his comrades followed suit, each bomber delivering its payload with precision before breaking away. Not all made it out. A direct hit sent one aircraft spiraling, flames trailing as it plunged toward the ocean. Another took heavy damage, limping away with smoke billowing from its engine. The air was thick with destruction, but the mission was not yet over. The pilots turned their aircraft toward open waters, pushing their engines to the limit. The enemy fleet, now in disarray, scrambled to contain the damage. Some torpedoes had struck their mark, sending shockwaves through steel hulls. Fires erupted aboard several ships, crew members scrambling to control the chaos. The bombers that survived continued their escape, weaving through the remnants of enemy fire. Fuel gauges ran dangerously low, but they pressed on, knowing the battle was not just about survival, it was about victory. As the last shots faded behind them, the pilots finally exhaled. The mission was done, but the war was far from over. Their squadron had flown into the fire and emerged, though not unscathed. The losses weighed on them, each empty seat a reminder of the price paid. They flew toward the fading light of the sun, the vast ocean below reflecting their path. To those who had witnessed the battle from afar, they resembled great seabirds once more, silhouettes against the sky, trailing one another home. The distant rumble of engines blended with the wind sweeping across the vast ocean. The bombers pressed forward, their formation intact despite the chaos left behind. Smoke and fire lingered on the horizon where the enemy fleet had been struck, but there was no time to look back. Every pilot remained locked into the moment, scanning the sky and the waters below for any sign of pursuit. The battle was not over yet. The planes flew low, hugging the surface of the ocean. It was their best defense now, staying beneath enemy radar, moving fast, leaving as little room as possible for fighters to intercept. The salt air clung to their aircraft, the sea stretching endlessly, its deep blue broken only by the shimmering reflections of their wings. They had lost men, good men, but the mission had been executed with precision. Now they had to survive the journey home. The lead pilot glanced at his fuel gauge. It was dipping lower than he would have liked, but they had enough if nothing went wrong. He adjusted his course slightly, signaling his men to follow suit. Behind him, the remaining bombers stayed in perfect alignment, their wings cutting through the sky in synchrony. The radio crackled to life. A voice, tense but steady, reported movement behind them. Enemy fighters. They had expected it. The Japanese would not let them go so easily. The enemy's aircraft were faster, more maneuverable, built for the hunt. But the bombers had numbers, discipline, and determination. Without hesitation, they adjusted their formation. If they scattered, they would be picked off one by one. Staying together increased their chances. The gunners aboard each plane readied their weapons, scanning the skies for the first signs of attack. Minutes passed like hours, the tension thick enough to feel in every breath. Then the attack came. The first enemy fighters streaked through the formation, a blur of motion and fire. Bullets ripped through the air, tearing at metal, shattering glass. The gunners responded instantly, tracking the enemy's path, unleashing rounds with precision. Another fighter followed, banking hard, cutting across their formation, trying to break them apart. Tracer rounds illuminated the sky, crisscrossing in a deadly dance. The bombers held firm, their gunners working relentlessly, eyes sharp, fingers steady. One enemy plane took a direct hit, its tail erupting in flames. It spun out of control, plunging toward the sea. Another dove in, firing relentlessly, rounds striking one of the bombers. Smoke billowed from its wing, the engine struggling. The pilot fought to keep control, his hands gripping the stick as his aircraft shuddered violently. The others closed in around him, shielding him as best they could. The enemy pressed harder, determined to finish what had been started. The sky was a battlefield once more, a war of speed and endurance. Another bomber fired its rear guns, hitting an enemy fighter that had gotten too close. The plane veered off, its pilot ejecting just before it vanished into the ocean. But the bombers were not unscathed. One had been lost, another barely holding together. The lead pilot knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Then, in the distance, hope. A friendly squadron, fast and ready for the fight. They had been waiting for them, prepared for this very moment. The enemy pilots saw it too. Their advantage was slipping. Within moments, the tide turned. The new arrivals stormed into the fray, their guns blazing, forcing the enemy fighters to break off. One by one, the enemy planes retreated, disappearing into the haze beyond the horizon. The battle was over. The bombers, battered but victorious, pressed on. The lead pilot exhaled, exhaustion creeping in, but there was no time to rest. The journey home was not yet complete. They climbed higher, breaking free from the churning sea winds. The horizon stretched ahead, a promise of safety just beyond reach. The radio remained quiet now, only the hum of engines filling the air. They had made it through, against the odds, against the fire, against the storm of war. As the coastline appeared in the distance, a wave of relief settled over them. Their home base awaited, runways prepared, medics and mechanics standing by. The landing would be rough for some, impossible for others. But they had returned. One by one, they descended, touching down on familiar ground. The bombers rolled to a stop, hatches opening, pilots stepping out, weary but alive. The wounded were rushed to medical tents, aircraft inspected, damage assessed. The lead pilot removed his helmet, running a hand through sweat-dampened hair. He looked around at those who had made it back, at the empty spaces where others should have been. There was no celebration, only quiet acknowledgement of what had been endured. They had flown through fire, danced with death, and returned. For now, the war was distant, pushed to the edges of the moment. But it would come again, another mission, another battle. And when it did, they would rise once more, like seabirds against the storm, gliding through the sky toward whatever awaited them beyond the horizon. The weight of exhaustion settled over them as the last of the bombers touched down. Dust and heat rose from the runways, engines sputtering to a halt. Mechanics swarmed the battered aircraft, assessing damage, replacing parts, patching holes torn by enemy fire. The scent of oil and scorched metal lingered in the air. The pilots climbed out slowly, muscles stiff, bodies aching from the relentless tension of battle. They had made it back, but the reality of war allowed no time for rest. One of the crew members slumped against the side of his aircraft, breath coming in shallow gasps. A medic reached him quickly, checking for wounds, but it wasn't just the physical toll that weighed on them. Each man carried the ghosts of those who hadn't returned. The missing bombers left spaces that would never be filled, names that would be spoken in hushed tones, memories etched into the minds of those who had flown beside them. The lead pilot removed his flight cap, wiping his brow as he surveyed the wreckage around him. His own aircraft had taken damage, riddled with bullet holes, a reminder of how close they had come to being another casualty of the war. He turned to his crew, their faces weary but resolute. There was no need for words. They all understood what had been sacrificed. As the sun dipped lower, the sky painted in deep oranges and reds, the debriefing began. They gathered in a makeshift tent, the flickering glow of a single lamp casting shadows across their tired expressions. The mission had been a success. The enemy fleet had suffered damage, their defenses shaken. Reports confirmed that the torpedoes had found their marks, striking the heart of the enemy's warships. They had done what they set out to do, but at a cost. The commanding officer studied the pilots, his gaze heavy with unspoken grief. He acknowledged their bravery, their skill, their unyielding determination in the face of near-certain death. He spoke of those who had not returned, their names read aloud, their sacrifice honored in the only way war allowed, by pressing forward, by continuing the fight they had given everything for. A silence followed, thick with unspoken thoughts. Each man carried his own memories, his own moments of doubt and fear, locked away behind steady expressions. They had seen fire and destruction, heard the screams of engines failing, watched the ocean claim their fallen brothers. None of it could be undone. Night settled over the airfield. The men dispersed, some retreating to their bunks, others finding solace in the dimly lit corners of the base, staring into the darkness, lost in thoughts they could not share. The lead pilot walked toward his aircraft once more, running a hand along its damaged frame. It had carried them through battle, through chaos, through fire and steel. It had endured, just as they had. A voice broke the silence beside him. One of his wingmen, younger than most, stood with arms crossed, eyes reflecting something beyond exhaustion, something deeper, a question left unspoken. The pilot met his gaze, understanding without needing to ask. There was no right answer, no reassurance that could erase what had been witnessed. So instead, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of all they had endured. The distant sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the quiet night. The ocean had been their battleground, its vastness both ally and enemy. It had swallowed the wreckage, concealed the fallen, carried them through the most harrowing moments of their lives. Now, it remained still, a reminder of what had passed and what would come again. Tomorrow would bring new orders, another mission, another flight into the unknown. The war did not pause for grief, did not grant time for reflection. It demanded everything and gave nothing in return. They would climb into their aircraft once more, engines roaring to life, wings cutting through the sky like the seabirds they resembled. For now, the airfield remained quiet. The planes stood in formation, silent sentinels waiting for dawn. The men rested as best they could, knowing that when the sun rose, they would rise with it. They would take to the skies once more, trailing one another through the endless expanse, carrying with them the weight of those who had flown before them. The horizon remained dark, stretching endlessly ahead. They did not know what awaited them beyond it. But they would go, because that was what they had been trained to do. They would fight, because they had no choice. They would return, or they would not. But above all, they would fly. Morning came quietly, the first light stretching across the airfield, casting long shadows over the rows of battered aircraft. The men stirred from their restless sleep, some waking before the call, others forcing themselves out of their bunks as the reality of another day settled over them. The war did not wait for grief to subside or for wounds to heal. It demanded that they move forward, no matter the cost. The lead pilot stood near his aircraft, hands resting on the cool metal of its fuselage. His fingers traced the bullet holes along its side, each one a reminder of how close they had come to being another name on the list of the fallen. He had lost men, good men, and yet here he was, still breathing, still standing. It was an unfair balance, one he could never justify. The mechanics worked diligently, replacing damaged parts, patching holes, preparing the planes for the next mission. Their hands moved with precision, their expressions unreadable. They understood what was at stake. Every bolt tightened, every engine checked, every wing reinforced. It all meant one thing: another flight into the unknown, another chance that not everyone would return. At the mess hall, the pilots ate in silence, the weight of the previous day still pressing heavily on them. Conversations were sparse, nods replacing words, unspoken agreements between men who had shared the sky and survived. The empty seats among them did not go unnoticed. There were no toasts, no celebrations, only the quiet acceptance that this was their reality. Orders came swiftly, delivered without ceremony. They would be flying again soon. Another target, another mission, another stretch of sky filled with fire and steel. Some of the younger men shifted uneasily, their hands tightening around their cups of coffee. But no one spoke of fear. To acknowledge it was to give it power. Instead, they focused on the routine, checking maps, reviewing flight paths, memorizing details that could mean the difference between survival and death. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. The ocean was vast, stretching beyond what the eye could see. It had taken their fallen, held them beneath its depths, swallowed their wreckage. And yet, it had also been their salvation, a path home when all seemed lost. The lead pilot watched his crew prepare, each man moving with purpose. They had flown together long enough to understand one another without speaking. Their trust was unshakable, built through battles that had tested them beyond anything they could have imagined. They had faced death together and emerged from the fire. But no one knew how many more times luck would be on their side. The sun rose higher, its golden light breaking through the morning haze. The engines of their planes roared to life, the deep rumble sending vibrations through the ground. They climbed into their cockpits, fastening harnesses, adjusting dials, breathing in the familiar scent of oil and metal. Their world was once again reduced to the instrument panels before them, the sky stretching infinitely above. One by one, the bombers moved into position, their wings catching the light as they taxied onto the runway. The radio crackled with final checks, voices calm, controlled. The air was thick with anticipation, the moment before flight always carrying the weight of uncertainty. Then, with a surge of power, the lead plane lifted from the ground, its wheels leaving the earth as it climbed into the sky. The others followed, forming a perfect line, their engines humming in unison. The ground below faded, replaced by the endless blue of the ocean beneath them. They flew as they always had, together, unwavering, moving like great seabirds gliding over the waves. Their course was set, their mission clear. The war was not over, and neither were they. They would return to the fight, just as they had before, carrying with them the memories of those who had been lost. The horizon stretched ahead, uncertain and unforgiving. But they did not hesitate. They pressed on, wings cutting through the air, disappearing into the vastness beyond. They were warriors of the sky, bound by duty, by brotherhood, by the endless call of battle. And as long as they could fly, they would never be forgotten. The sky stretched endlessly before them, a vast canvas of shifting blues and whites, unbroken except for the distant glimmer of the sun on the ocean below. The bombers maintained their course, engines humming steadily as they moved in perfect formation. The war had given them no time to reflect, no space for grief, only the task at hand, the mission, the flight, the fight that never seemed to end. The lead pilot adjusted his grip on the controls, his gaze steady as he scanned the horizon. Each flight felt different, yet somehow always the same. The anticipation, the unspoken fears, the weight of the past pressing against the present. They had survived so many encounters, cheated death more times than any man should be allowed, yet it never felt like enough. The losses never became easier. The ocean below rolled in endless motion, stretching beyond sight, swallowing the memories of battles fought above it. Somewhere in its depths lay the wreckage of their fallen comrades, men who had shared their journey but had not made it home. The war did not wait to mourn them, and so the living had learned to carry their absence in silence. A voice crackled over the radio, a simple confirmation of their course. The words were routine, yet each time they came, they served as a reminder that they were still here, still moving forward. The bombers continued, their silhouettes gliding like great birds against the morning sky. Minutes stretched into hours. The engines droned, steady and unyielding. The mission was uneventful, a rare reprieve in a war that rarely offered such moments. No enemy fighters appeared to intercept them. No anti-aircraft fire tore through the sky. It was just them, the air, and the ceaseless horizon. The lead pilot stole a glance at his crew, each man absorbed in his duties. They had long since learned to operate with quiet efficiency, their movements instinctive, their communication often unspoken. They had become more than just a team. They were a brotherhood, bound not by choice but by necessity. As the return flight began, the weight in his chest remained. He had seen too much, lived through too many days where the sky turned to fire and the sea to graves. Each time he returned, the war seemed to take a little more of him, leaving behind something hollow, something that could never quite be filled. The coastline appeared on the horizon, faint at first, then growing clearer. Home, or at least as close as they had to one. The sight should have been comforting, but it only reminded him of the cycle they lived in. Fly out, fight, return, and do it all over again. It was endless, and he no longer knew where it would lead. The radio crackled again, this time from the airfield. Instructions for landing, clearances given, runways prepared. One by one, the bombers descended, touching down with heavy grace, rolling to a stop as dust and heat rose around them. The ground crews moved in quickly, mechanics assessing damage, medics standing by, officers waiting for reports. The lead pilot climbed out of his cockpit, stretching his stiff limbs. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows over the field. He removed his flight cap, running a hand through his damp hair, eyes scanning the row of returning planes. They had all made it back this time. That alone was a victory, however small. As he walked toward the debriefing area, he caught sight of a group of young pilots standing near the barracks. They watched him and his crew with quiet curiosity, their faces a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. He saw in them what he had once been, eager, fearless, unaware of what awaited them in the skies. They would learn, just as he had. The briefing was short, the mission logged as a success. No losses, no engagements, just another flight checked off in an endless war. The men dispersed, some heading for food, others to their bunks. The lead pilot lingered a moment longer, staring at the map spread across the table. Targets, routes, enemy positions. He had studied so many of these before, yet each time felt like the first. Stepping outside, he inhaled the cool evening air. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and oil, the ever-present reminders of where they were. The war was not over. It would not be over for a long time. He knew that tomorrow or the day after, they would be sent out again, back into the sky, back into the unknown. For now, though, there was a moment of quiet. He looked up at the sky, the same sky he had flown through countless times, the same sky that had taken so much and given so little. It was beautiful in its indifference, vast and untouchable, holding within it the memories of every battle, every mission, every life lost. He turned away, walking back toward the barracks, past the planes that stood silent and waiting in the dimming light. The war would continue. They would fly again, and when the time came, they would rise into the sky once more, trailing one another, gliding like seabirds toward whatever awaited them beyond the horizon.